All right, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of T Boy Swag, season 3, episode 4. Anyways, happy pre-Halloween. We have a great, really relevant topic for this spooky season. And I have a special guest to introduce it with me. My guest.
Okay, so I'm always confused as to like, okay, do I talk now? But hello everyone. I'm DJ Hot Chip and Lie. And I'm very excited to be here and this spooky ooky season. My favorite. Honestly, I said this the other day, like Halloween is like my favorite holiday. It's kind of like my Christmas.
I love Halloween. I love like Halloween season's just so fun. Like I love Halloween music. Halloween music is like the best. Like it's so campy.
Yeah, and I feel like Halloween music doesn't take itself seriously in the same way that Christmas music does. I feel like I can't stand Christmas music because it tries to take itself seriously. Whereas like Halloween music is like this obviously like silly and goofy and campy. So it's like you're just supposed to like be silly with it. But like so that's why I can appreciate a lot of Halloween music as compared to like other holiday music, honestly.
Yeah. I mean for me, like I grew up like goth, like and industrial, and my parents, it's actually their wedding was like on Halloween. And like for the reception, they dressed up as like Harley Quinn and Joker, which honestly gives a lot of foreshadowing for their marriage being leading to divorce. But like I love Halloween. Like the decorations are so campy. Like they don't take them seriously. And you're exactly right. Like the Halloween music, I hate Christmas music because it's like, oh, like all I need for Christmas is you. Like, okay, fuck off. I want to hear about like the purple people eater. Like it's fun. Like it's just so fun and silly. Um, yeah, and for this spooky season that we both love, we're going to be talking about horror movies this week. So, DJ Hot Chip and Lie, what is your favorite horror movie?
Okay. I have like three answers because I feel like I have them for different scenarios. So if you were to just come up to me on a random day, you're like, what's your favorite horror movie? I would just say Carrie because it was one of my first horror movies that I was like really obsessed with. And I think I kind of know why now, but I think as a kid, I was just like, there's just something so satisfying about seeing like the someone not I don't condone revenge, but there's just something about like seeing Carrie get revenge that I was just like obsessed with.
It's the most satisfying revenge, I think, in
Right. And
any film. Just like, yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's also like a cool way to get revenge. Like I wish I low key had like woke up and just like knew I had telekinesis and I was just like, oh, it's over. Like it's actually over for everyone. Um if it okay, but then if you ask me what's a favorite horror movie, and I get sense from you that you're like a niche film viewer and that you would, appreciate like my film knowledge or whatever, I would have to say Saw. Um, because
Yes,
I
I
feel
love Saw.
like not to guess so like normie local Tumblr 2016 on the podcast, but like I feel like for the normal person, Saw is like this like gore, like just this like overlord with gore. And I feel like I definitely get why people think that, but I feel like if people actually like dug into the plot of Saw and really like understood it, it's like a really interesting tale about justice and about like how sometimes like day-to-day systems fail and it's like how can we still get justice through that. Do I agree with like all the like the traps or anything like that? Obviously not, and I don't like condone any of that, but it's just like it's such a nuanced story or just like perspective, and I'm just like I that's what I appreciate a lot about Saw.
Oh my gosh. Okay. When it comes to Saw, I feel like Saw, trans people, especially trans mass people love Saw. Like, I know a lot of like people that really like for anybody, mainly like a lot of like lesbians, they really like Amanda. Like, Amanda's their queen. And then I know like a ton of trans guys that love Adam, like, um, the guy that gets left behind in Saw 1. Like, trans guys love that man so much. And I think like Saw, it's like you're so right because it's like it's so campy. It's like it's gore porn, but it's also so campy. But then it's also like kind of having a statement, but it also like there's so many movies and they lose the plot like eventually, and it's so fucking funny. Like there's some parts of Saw that are so uncomfortable for me to watch, like the needle scene in Saw 2. I can't do it, but I love Saw like as a franchise, and I feel like it's such a trans franchise. Like trans people have really taken it over.
No, absolutely. Honestly, with Saw, I think I've watched. Okay, this people are probably gonna think I'm weird, but I've actually watched like all of them or a good. I think I haven't seen all the new remakes or like the newer installments, but I've seen like basically all the classics like 1 through 6 and I think 7. Um, I think my favorite's actually 2 and 6. But yeah, honestly, I'm not even a big gore person. Like I actually hate gore. Like I can't even see my own blood, or else I get like lightheaded. So it's like a really weird thing that I even like Saw in the first place. But I think it's just like there's just something so creative about Saw, and I feel like I never prior to like seeing Saw, I never saw like a horror movie like that, and I feel like the gore in it is like justifiable. Like I understand why it's like a gory film. It's not just like gore for the sake of being gore. Um,
Yeah,
and then just
I
really quick, my last answer because I don't want to take up the whole time talking about just like our favorite horror movies. Um, my last answer, and I think this will just be like if I'm not feeling up to say Carrie, but I want to say something else that's like kind of more modern or more like I don't know, just more like people would probably know it better. I would make this is kind of basic, but I don't care. I would probably say Hereditary or Midsummer. Um, just because like especially with Hereditary, I really love how like it's basically a family drama until the very end when it turns into like a like cult film about like worshiping a god of hell. And I also with Midsummer, I love honestly how it's like a horror movie that doesn't have to rely on dark and spooky cinematography to get its horror across. It's like all bright colors. I think that's just like a really interesting take on horror. Um, but I want to hear about like what your favorite horror movies are, or if we have maybe some possible overlap, which would be really cool.
I think for me, my all-time favorite horror movie is Hellraiser. I love Hellraiser. On Tumblr, if you go on my fucking Tumblr, the title of my Tumblr blog is Demons to Some, Angels to Others, like literally Pinhead's line. Like I love Hellraiser. Like I still need to see the new Hellraiser movie because I've heard like mixed things about it. But I love trans femme Pinhead. Like, yes, I think the Cenobites are so gender. Like, there's so much. And like when I was a kid, I was really not into horror. Like I would get spooked by like Freddy masks at Party City, like Halloween time. Like I was not good with it. But I'm a really big like Cronenberg fan. I like body horror a lot. And then I think like one of like I don't know, there's like a lot of really I love like the Evil Dead franchise, which is another like super trans. Like Ash Williams is trans. I'm just saying, like his name's literally Ashley Joanna Williams. Like you're kidding. You're kidding. Trans mask, if I've seen it. Like I've seen his chest. I know there's top degree scars. I know. I am aware. But I think, oh my god, I think our overlap is Saw. I like Saw that I don't even say like, oh, I love Saw a lot because I know crazy fans of Saw. Like
Yeah.
I have some friends that like have seen it like 4 times, like the whole thing through, like more than
God.
twice. And I'm like, you are so insane.
Like who are you? Yeah.
I'm like, girl, go to therapy.
Saw is
um
not therapy. Like, let's put the saw down.
but
Like,
let's put Saw down. I feel like my most controversial take is I really love the movie Tusk, which is where the guy gets turned into a walrus.
I've heard of that movie. I've never seen it, but
It's fucking great.
it looks very interesting.
I
Um,
I know so many people that hate it because of how extreme it is, and I totally get that. It's a really like it's intense.
yeah.
I saw it in a movie theater, so I was literally like in a seat. Like I couldn't look away. I had to just sit there and watch it. And like, is it Stockholm syndrome? Maybe. Maybe so. Maybe so. But I really fucking love that movie now. So
Oh my god, I might have to check that out. It sounds like something. Not
it's
I
an
don't know if it's something that I
experience.
would like. I don't know if it's something that I would like, something that I would hate, but it sounds like something. Um, one thing about Hellraiser, I used to I for years I wanted to be how like my costume was I wanted to be Hellraiser for Halloween.
Mhm.
Um, but I've never actually seen the movie, but I know like the like the character because they're like so like iconic. But it's like I've heard so many like good things about Hellraiser 2 and how like a lot of like I've just heard a lot about how it resonates with like queer trans folks, and I'm just like I feel like I need to be into this lore of Hellraiser. Uh,
Okay, Hellraiser's lore is fucking insane. Like after the second one, just like the lore they add into it is just like insane. And you're like, what the fuck? But I think if you liked Hereditary for like the family trauma part of it, I think like you might like Hellraiser 1 because Hellraiser 1 is a lot about like it's a horror movie, but it's also about family dynamics and like remarrying and like an evil
yeah,
stepmother kind of.
yeah,
And I think it's fucking great. Like if you like that type of stuff, it's kind of like that. It's a little more leaning into fantasy horror than Hereditary, but like the same type of like it's kind of playing on family dynamics.
yeah. I see. I also want to say I was calling the character Hellraiser because their name slipped out of my mind. Pinhead. I wanted to be
Pinhead.
for Halloween for many years. Um, But yeah, I'm definitely planning to check that out sometime soon. In terms of Evil Dead, I've only seen the 2013 remake, but I've never seen the original. And
That's
I
insane.
know. It's probably like, what the hell are you doing watching the remake? But it's just like what was available and what
Fair enough.
I got time to watch. But I'll again also heard a lot about Evil Dead. Um and Evil Dead's like actually like again, I haven't seen the original, but just the remake, like it's actually like truly horrifying. Like I remember like Evil Dead was one of the horror movies I watched where I was like, this is actually like really scary. Like I'm scared. Like at least with some horror movies, I can play it off as like, oh, this is campy or this is silly. But with Evil Dead, I was like, this is a lot. Like,
I've never seen the remake of it, but the thing is, like the original ones are really funny. Like
okay,
they're comedic. Like at
okay, see,
least like there's one it's called the Army of Darkness, and basically like the main character Ash like time travels to ye olden times and like is stuck like in like the medieval era, like for no reason. And that's like the whole comedy of it. It's really comedy based.
okay.
It still has like fucked up body like effects. Like it's very gory.
Yeah. I think what it is that I think the 2013 one took it more seriously. And it's like it really is like just standard horror movie. And also the gore, the effects on the 2013 one, I was like, whoa, like I think I read somewhere that they didn't use any CGI for the 2013 one, and that's all like prosthetics and stuff like that. And honestly, it's like it's wild.
That's crazy.
I think we need to do a trade-off. I'll watch the original and you need to watch the 2013 remake.
Yes, we need to. Like have like a maybe like a dual we can have like a double feature
Yeah.
party.
We
That'd be
just
fun.
like we just book report it. Like you watch the 2013 one, I'll watch the original and we'll report back on our
Yeah.
what we found.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Okay. So we're going to be we talked about our favorite movies, but we really bonded over like we've been talking about doing an episode like this forever about
Yeah.
transness and horror. And I'm so happy we're finally able to do it because like we both like we'll see each other and sometimes we'll just have conversations about transness and body horror. And it's like we need to just do this episode. Like we just need to like record this.
Yeah.
Like
Let's just go ahead and put the voice memos and just put out the episode.
yes. So like we want to start this off kind of like talking about the monstrous feminine a bit, right? Like, let's see, DJ Hotchip and Lie, what are your thoughts on the monstrous feminine and like trans femme perspectives on it?
Yeah. So honestly, I feel like for me, in terms of the monstrous feminine, it's something that I kind of always observed, but never really had like a term for, or like had like some sort of like character, like categorization for like, oh, this is like the monstrous feminine, or this is that. Um, but I think especially like as I watched a lot of horror movies, and I gravitated a lot towards horror movies that where it was like a lot of the women in it were like, I don't want to say the monster, because I feel like there's some horror movies where it's like they have monstrous things that they do, but I also feel like they're justified. But anyways, I feel like it's just a matter of sake of like, oh, some of these women in horror are like so over the top in whatever characteristic that it makes them scary and in turn makes them monsters. And I feel like I kind of did some research. Look at me doing research. I did some research into like the monstrous feminine, and kind of, it's obviously like a pretty. It's not a trope that just existed in like film and then just started in film. It's like been a thing that has existed in a lot of other things. But I think especially in film is really interesting because I feel like in terms of horror, it's like I feel like I feel like a lot of people resonate with it and take different elements from the monstrous feminine sort of like genre. Like I read this article where it was talking about how a lot of like cis women find empowerment in the monstrous feminine sort of like horror movie genre. And then I've also just seen a lot of discourse about like how a lot of trans women find sort of like what's the word? Not necessarily comfort, but they find they can resonate a lot with what the monstrous feminine like what a lot of these women embody, or sort of like how they take up space or how they're perceived by like the world around them, and like the world is like the universe that the movie exists in. And I just think it's like a really interesting trope, I guess, for lack of a better word, just because I feel like um especially in a lot of like, for example, I was just gonna use Carrie for an example. I think with Carrie, like in terms of like what is it? Like I feel like what a lot of people, or in the movie, what I'm remembering from Carrie, is like they fear her for her timidness, which, or like for her not wanting to be as outwardly as like a lot of the other girls around her. And I feel like that's something that like I've definitely seen be attributed to like women, like being timid, being quiet, being like kind of to yourself, reserved. It's sort of like this like stereotype or something that like it's kind of projected onto women a lot. And I feel like it's interesting how with Carrie, it was like kind of the thing that set her apart from the other women, or just the other people in the movie. And it's something that from then on, she was like basically monstricized for. Like she was monstricized for having that sort of characteristic and for being so kind of to herself and just having her own, like they basically kind of put her to this position where like she's made the laughing stock of everyone, and so she like decides she's had enough, and she decides to kind of like show the actual power that she's had. And I feel like I don't know, there's like a metaphor with Carrie that it's like I'm kind of like it's slipping out of my memory, or like it's slipping out of my fingers, but like there's just something interesting with what like in terms of just Carrie, but just in if we're talking about the whole monstrous feminine genre, like the certain characteristics that you can pinpoint to a lot of these like women villains or monsters and just see what is the trait that is making them scary and what and how is it that it's just like a characteristic that is probably not really scary, but it's just like how society in and of itself treats it, and that's what makes it like a horror, like a horrendous thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I find that really interesting because I think like the monster is feminine in the original like writing, the original book it comes from, where like I forget her name, but there's a book called The Monster is Feminine where like this whole like concept by Barbara Creed that she kind of like posits, it's like really connected to um like some of it is like a lot of it's attributed to like almost bodily function and like women's like the kind of how there's the immaculate conception which is divine but like the monstrosity of birth and like female reproduction and that being part of it. But I find it really interesting of like the monstrous feminine when you decontextualize it from like this kind of cis womanhood into like other aspects. Because even like I was rewatching a movie recently. Um, I went on a whole rant on Instagram about it. The Lair of the White Worm, where it's like about like there is monstrous feminine in like the typical way you see it. Like there's a character who's like a the main villain is this seductress lady who's like kind of really lesbian. Like she has a strap on and like she's honestly she kind of robust, but she's like her whole thing is she like she almost has like a Jennifer's body type vibe of like killing men but then keeping women alive. It's kind of like really like lesbian code, but that's like her monstrosity. Um, but it's really interesting because at the end of the movie, there's like a plot twist that like the main guy who has been basically like the person saving everybody, he got bit by her and he thought he took an antidote, but it wasn't an antidote. It was like for something else. He didn't have an antidote to the bite. And her bite turns you into like what she is, like almost vampiric in that sense. And he finds this out and just goes along with it. Like he just decides to become her, like her in a way. And like the end is like he's like this other guy he's with, the other male character. They're in a car and he's like, well, I'm absolutely famished. And then he's just like almost like slyly looking at him. And then there's a reveal because he's been wearing a kilt the entire movie that like he's been bit and it's just like the pulling of the skirt up. And I'm like, how like about like almost like men in the monstrous feminine, like how is like I just got such severe brain rot over like kind of like a man taking on like the monstrous feminine in like not necessarily a trans-coded sense, but in the like just the physical monstrous feminine as like a concept of like it kind of becomes queer in that way. I don't know, fascinates me. But I really like I think like the thing about the monsters feminine is just kind of like things that don't appeal to the male gaze. That really is like what sets it up. So like kind of like trans feminists, it's like even with like I know like a lot of another community gets tropicalized lesbians. And it's because of simultaneous like fetishization, but also disgust. Like that's kind of like really similar to what happens with like trans femmes too. Like where it's like a fetishization and then disgust at the same time. And it's like that's where the monstrous feminine like blooms.
No, definitely. I think um I was slipping on my words, but you put it very um like correctly in saying that it's like things that disrupt the male gaze or that like sometimes it's like stuff that enforces that the male gaze. And it's like I like how sometimes it's like taking that, but it turns it around and it kind of shows how that's like disruptive or how it like affects like things that negatively. But I feel like especially in terms of like what is it? I think it's really interesting how like kind of like I mean I can't speak for everyone, but I feel like it's this like the monstrous feminist is definitely like a really what's the word? Oh my god, you might have to cut this in post because, like I said, I'm like thinking about it. But it's like a really embraced sort of trope amongst a lot of like queer trans communities. So I feel like it's like you said, like it's taking a lot of these like stereotypes, but also just sort of like sexism, transphobia, like queerphobia, and it's like I feel like a lot of monstrous feminine figures represent like the combat against that. And I feel like that's what a lot of people really resonate. I feel like that's especially what I resonate with it. And I think that's why I like Carrie a lot as a kid. I feel like I really liked how she had this battle. I mean, remember, like I haven't watched Carrie in a while, but remembering from like from what I can remember with Carrie, Carrie was like a really big victim of like sexism of her time period, just because she wasn't in the same likeness as like other women around her, just like society at the time. I think Carrie was just a really big push against like the sexism they were like kind of enforcing against her. And I think I really resonated with that because I feel like to me, it like kind of just screamed like trying to combat the phobias, the isms that I was kind of facing at that age and like battling against them. And it's like satisfying as a viewer or just like satisfied as a viewer with that context to see like Carrie fight back against that. And I mean, winning question mark because I mean she kind of like dies at the end, but in a sense she does win because she's able to prove to like the people who are like tarnishing her, like giving her a hard time that like she's stronger than all of those things. And I don't know. I That's why I personally love Carrie a lot. Um, but I also know that just with other like monstrous feminine horror movies, there's things people take from it, things people really embrace, and I love how people can kind of resonate with that a lot and kind of make it so that they could kind of put their own experience onto these things.
Yeah, I think like Carrie, especially how you put it, of like it's kind of reclaiming and becoming like a resistance. Like I think a whole thing of the monstrous feminine is like that becoming like reclaiming like the bad instead of like fixing yourself, I guess. Like it's kind of like that like being individual instead of like especially like with people that exist outside of male gaze or even within the male gaze, like you kind of have to like fit the male gaze. And you can't really be a person, you're just like a concept, right? Or you're like an idea or just a visual, just something nice to look at. And I think like with Tommy, not Tommy, that's a different movie. With Carrie, like Carrie is like she's very like she's just put under a lot of pressure. Like she doesn't even there's no justified reason as to why she has these bad experiences. She's just like a girl that's getting like just having the worst fucking time ever, both at school and at home. And she is just kind of like the frustration there and her taking like back like her like agency as like a woman. And especially since she's like a teenage girl, like teenage girls are put under so much pressure. Like I feel like this is the same for Jennifer's Body, where it's like the pressure of being like a woman or being like a teenage girl and becoming a woman is like so just destructive that it'll just drive you fucking insane. And like all of the girls like in like Jennifer's Body and in like Carrie and other like kind of like Final Girl, like but really like woman focused films. It's about them just like fucking shit up. Like it's kind of like a revenge. It's like always revenge, but not even revenge on a specific person, but like on like the whole sexist society, which I fucking love.
Yeah, not I did not mean for this podcast to become a Carrie analysis show, but I think Carrie's a really good just like branching out point to a lot of different things. I feel like one other interesting thing about Carrie is that on top of like dealing with the like burden of sexism from like her school peers, Carrie also has to push back against like religious judgment from like her own mom. And I also think that's a really interesting thing and like kind of informing at least the monstrous feminine lens from in terms of Carrie is that like a lot of monstrous feminine sort of like characters or just like beings are sort of like the abomination or like the contrarian to a lot of like religious pushback or religious sort of like viewpoints of things. Um, like what am I saying? In terms of Carrie, like if her mom restricts her from just like being a teenage girl because she believes that her womanhood is somehow demonic or satanic or somehow not aligning to like whatever religious beliefs her mom has going on. And I think that kind of ties into like why I feel like a lot of trans folks, queer folks, like could resonate with a lot of monstrous feminine figures is because like a lot of monstrous feminine figures in and of themselves are like kind of contrarian to or like pushing back against a lot of these like expectations that like religion, society, but like religion specifically kind of could enforce on a woman or enforce on a character. And I feel like queer and trans folks know like the very ins and outs of that, of like kind of having to validate your existence or having to like your existence is under this microscopic viewpoint because of like these religious structures. And obviously, like I don't want to, you know, pinpoint every religion or like have it be a like blame every religion in the world because it's in terms of Carrie specifically, it's a lot of like Christianity and a lot of these structures that like are what torment Carrie. But I also know historically that it is a lot of Christianity that has like had that sort of negative like pushback for a lot of like queer trans folks to just sort of like literally just live their lives. And I feel like that's another reason why I think I resonated with Carrie a lot was because like her mom was so fucking obnoxious to me. And I feel like the fact that like Carrie kind of stood up against her, it was like oh, this person standing up against this thing that's telling you that you're like wrong or that what you're like who you are as a person fundamentally is like incorrect or like sinful. And she's like not letting that stop her from just literally existing.
Yeah, I think I love that this has become like a Carrie discussion moment because I really enjoy Carrie and I haven't really thought about this deeply of Carrie for a long time. Um, I we're gonna stop for a break, and then when we come back, we're gonna be talking about so much trans shit. We got transness and horror. We have artists that use horror as a trope that are trans. Like, be right back. Listen to some great tunes, courtesy of DJ Hot Chip and Lie.
La doña, la patrona en esta mierda. Mira, mira la loca la chiquita, mijita, faldita de color crema, tacones negros, falda beige, tacones beige, abrigo beige, labio rojo, beige y negro, va muñeca de metal, va muñeca de metal, dale muñeca. Easy fit, throw it up, bitch, bounce back, get it wet, hit it, rip it, stroke, tranny, coming hard, till my chochi tosses raw. Oh my god, que esa botica is so hot, baby, hush it while I lick my bloody claws. Cuddly fur, sharpened paws. Did I stutter? Hear me roar while I'm shitting on the pavement. Wow, how? Throw the towel. Ay, que esta botica va, boba, va. Y tú que mira, ja, va. Todas estas putas son mis hijas. Me la como golosina. Ay, que grima, ser tanta envidiosa. Será que no les queda de otra. Yo avasallo, ni me rayan, ni me rayo. Sin agenda, sin ensayo, sin fallo. Poco a poco yo me monto encima. Chute de adrenalina, loca, asesina. Todas me miran por las calles y yo les reto. Más les vale y con respeto. Hay respeto, que si no aprieto. Al son de los tambores quedan boquifloja. Estas bobas, la furia que yo convoco. Yo me subo en mi nota y todas las muñecas en la disco. Brinco yo en un charco y te salpico. Todas mis muñecas que están ricas. Denle con confianza, chica. Brujita de las buenas, hey. Y sin pena, sin condena. Te lo pongo, soy tu cena.
First time in my life, I'm not afraid. First time I remember feeling anything. There is no turning back now. I can't be saved. And in the next life they'll remember me. I'm the greatest God created. I'm a sickness, I'm contagious, I'm a anything. There is no turning back now. I can't be saved, and in the next life they'll remember me. Deine Zeit ist abgelaufen. Ich bin ein Albtraum. Ich bin ein Omen. Wenn du mich siehst, fängst du besser an zu laufen. Kannst du glauben? Sag jetzt deine letzten Worte. Ich krieg immer, was ich wollte. Ich bin das Ende deiner Tage. Ich bin die Krankheit. Ich bin die Plage. Anything. There is no turning back now. I can't be saved, and in the next life they'll remember me.
3, 2, 1. All right, welcome back, everyone. All right, DJ Hot Chip and Lie. We talked about the monster is feminine. Now let's talk about trans people in horror. What thoughts do you have?
Yeah. Well, especially in particular to the topic we're about to talk about is I wish that a lot of more trans people in horror were just able to be portrayed normally. But unfortunately, there's a really big history about how transness is used as a trope to scare audiences in horror movies. There's a lot of examples we could talk about, and I mean we could talk about examples all day because there's actually I saw on YouTube there's like an hour-long video about trans and horror, and I believe all the movies are about how like trans people be utilized as a trope, and I'm just like the fact that there's like a huge compilation of movies, but that's besides the point. Yeah, like one really big example is Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. I've personally never seen Silence of the Lambs. I don't know if you have seen it. Have you seen the movie?
Yeah, I saw it a long time ago. Like it was one of those things that was like on TV, so I watched it. And like, it's one of those things like when I was a kid, I watched it and I was like, oh, that's like kind of weird. But like, I wasn't trans when I was like a kid. So I didn't know anything about it. And then like in retrospect, it's like, oh, fuck. That's so transphobic. And there's like, I don't know, there's like a whole era in the 90s where just there was a bunch of these like almost like trans femme characters. I always say almost trans because there's one movie I'm thinking about called Skinner, where the main character isn't necessarily trans femme, but like basically like stealing people's skin to like as to wear as like outfits, but specifically women. Like I don't know why that was a trope or a thing in the 90s. Like it's been like a trope all the time, but like that specific, like I've seen 2 movies with that in the 90s, and I'm not saying that's a trend, but I'm saying that it's weird that there's 2 of them. Like, there's this movie called Skinner, and the whole thing is that this guy skins people and wears their skin, but it's not really gender specific, but he does indeed wear like women's skin. Like it's kind of like about like he's trying to kill this woman. Like it's so weird, but I think like Signs of the Lamb, it's like one of those movies where you really could have had a movie without this particularly.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know. I've never seen Silence of the Lambs. Another example a lot of people bring up in this sort of like topic is Psycho, which I have seen Psycho. Psycho is like, I feel like a different, or not different, but I think it's like an interesting thing because if I remember correctly, I think they actually reference transness in Psycho, and they specifically are like, oh no, I forgot the main character's name. Oh my god, what's they're like such a famous name. Okay, I'm not gonna spend time on that, but the main guy of Psycho, um, I remember in the very end, spoiler alert, but also it's like a bajillion years old. Like, come on now. Spoiler alert. Basically, in the end, I think they reference transness. They're like, oh no, he's not trans. He's just like, but like he like I think when the police are trying to find out like why it is that he did what he did, like they're like the number one thing they come to and like the first conclusion is like he's trans. And then they're like, oh, actually, no, they're not trans. Like it's actually this something else. But I remember when I watched that Psycho, and I think I first watched it a couple years ago, so it was pretty recently. I found that interesting because I was like, it's interesting how the very first kind of like conclusion and the like kind of in their mind, the first obvious explanation is like this person is insane because they're trans. Like if that makes sense. And I just found that to be such a like really like obviously it's transphobic, like no doubt, but I just thought it was a really interesting like it just really shows the attitudes people had about trans people around that time. I mean, Psycho, I mean, was like I said, was made a really, really long time ago. So, but I feel like a lot of these similar sentiments are like still pretty prominent today. And I feel like honestly, these horror movies did more to like harm trans people than it did to like help a lot of trans people. Like I definitely, I mean, I don't know personally, but I have heard a lot of people kind of find something to kind of enjoy or to kind of click with in these movies. But like in my personal view, I'm just like, I feel like movies like this kind of help push more stereotypes. And like if say for like if someone never met a trans person and all they've seen is like Psycho and like Silence of the Lambs, it's like that's all they really have in their head, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. Like I've seen it in action. Like I remember when I worked at Walmart, like there was like this trans woman like that was just shopping, and like my fucking cis het coworker like said something about like Buffalo Bill, and I like looked at him like, you know, I'm trans, right? And like kind of shut him up, but it was just one of those where I'm like, how fucking you gotta be fucking kidding me right now. Like it is 2020. You fuck off. And it's like I feel like it's a really understated thing because people say like, oh, like this type of media perpetuates bad stereotypes and stuff, but then like you're like, oh, what's an example of it? But it's like I feel like when it comes to trans characters in film, I've seen the most like immediate recognition based off of like a shitty representation. Or and even like I don't know, Psycho's really fascinating just because like it even mirrors like how they thought about transness at the time. Like it's like, oh well, he's not gay, like oh his mother, the whole stuff with like the mother relationships with your mother, like create like weird Freudian shit, like creating like a disconnect and like, oh, you're effeminate because you are too connected to your mother. And it's like, be fucking for real right now. It I don't know. Psycho's so interesting because it's like it just has so many layers because I think like even Anthony Perkins, like he was like queer in some way. I know he died of AIDS, but he's one of those like he like had a wife and kids. He's like, I'm not gay. I'm not gay because I have all these things. And he was like really heavily in the closet. And there's still debate to this day about it. But it's so interesting, like how these legacies play out. Because I feel like gay representation, it's not that it's like fine, but it's like not as bad. But like trans representation, when there's bad trans representation, it's genuinely awful to the community because there's no trans representation. So if you have a bad one, it's like, oh fuck.
Yeah. Also, just one last thing about Psycho is that isn't it known as like the first kind of slasher film, like one of the very first ones? I think.
I think I would say so. Yeah. Because I think
Yeah,
before then it's a lot of like B monster movies, you know?
yeah. So I find that very interesting that like, I mean, I don't know if Alfred Hitchcock like knew he was gonna make history when making the first slasher film, but I find it interesting that it's like in the very kind of first movie of the genre of like a serial killer going on like a chase to kill people, it's like the precursor to why this person is that way is because there's a possibility of them being trans or cross-dressing or like having that sort of like relationship with gender. Like I just think that's a very telling thing of like what society feared at the time. And it's like, let's take what we fear and make it into like a horror movie. And I mean, like I said, in Psycho, they explicitly are like, oh, well, no, Norman Bates, that's his name. Norman this took me this whole time. Norman Bates is like not trans. It's just like his whole his mother he's embodying his mother, yada yada. But it's like there's still those like trans undertones. So there's like those undertones of like this is supposed to portray transness in some shape, way, or form, and like this character is like doing all these horrendous things because of those precursors. If that makes sense.
Totally, totally. It's really interesting, at least, like with yeah, with horror, like when it comes to like I've never really thought about that way of like Psycho being the first slasher, then kind of be like the first killer whose like main scariness factor is that like he cross dresses, and then that even leading to like Silence of the Lambs and like Sleepaway Camp being another one, and it's just so I feel like trans femininity especially is like been so like monsterized in horror that like it becomes akin to like someone like Jason being like it's like, oh yeah, this trans like femme coded person and then Jason are the same exact levels of that. And it's like this whole like villainization of queerness, because I know like that was something with like Freddy is more cis queerness of like he was like a like kind of there's like a queer coding to like a lot of like Nightmare on Elm Street, but then he's also like written as like a pedophile sometimes. And that's like inherently like a homophobic like trope. So you're like, oh, like he's queer in like a pedophile way. And it's kind of just really like there's a demonization of like queerness, but especially transness in throughout all of horror. And like I think it's nice that like there's like stuff like the newer Hellraiser movie where it was like a trans femme playing Pinhead, but still it's not like, oh, this is gonna cure everything wrong.
No, definitely. And I kind of want to like segue into, I think it's interesting talking about like how a lot of trans femme or just, yeah, a lot of how trans femmes are like portrayed in horror movies and how, or just like a lot of the like notions that like these directors or just like these film creators had in portraying these people or like utilizing their transness to create these like, you know, killers, monsters, etc. But I think it's also really interesting how not necessarily reclaiming the same things, but like how the trans folks have utilized sort of monstrous, like scary aesthetics as something to reclaim. So I think it kind of like I kind of want to ask, like, do you have any thoughts about that, or like, is that something you've noticed as well in a lot of trans artistry?
Yeah, I feel like even in like trans artistry, but also in like trans like culture discourse of like kind of like reclaiming like monstrous stuff of like taking it on and like putting it in their art or putting it in their stuff is like so problematic. I know I do it all the time, and I've like seen artists do it all the time. And it's kind of a really interesting like
Yeah, definitely.
marrying. I don't know. It's like really hard to quantify it, but it's like really on both sides of like all sides of like so many. Like I know there's kind of the trope of like, oh, like it's like more of a trope, but more like a transphobic trope of like, oh my gosh, sweet, innocent, like non-binary. I feel like the thing that unifies like trans people is loving kind of loving like monstrosity. It's kind of like really queer, like loving the monster type vibe.
Yeah. I think I mean like I said earlier, I can't speak for everyone, but I think like I personally think like I could get the appeal for monsters. I personally like love a monster movie, whatever. Or just sort of like in some of the work I do, I kind of like try to see how I can embrace the creepiness or like horror in any way. Because I feel like for me, like as a queer trans person, it's like I feel like I feel like sometimes our identities are already kind of seen as like other, and I feel like that otherness or that sort of like it the oh my god, the act of it already being like picked apart or like put aside, it's like what causes for these things to then be like monster sized. Like that's a lot of people then in turn like villainize or make things look like scary or make them look evil. And I feel like I think I am drawn to monsters, so I could kind of see like the appeal, or I could kind of like not sympathize, because obviously I'm not sympathizing with like real monsters, but like especially like in horror movies, like or just like as a thing to embrace. It's like if kind of the world is already telling you that you're scary or that you're like a lot of these other things, it's like why not like actually take it that way, you know, or take it to that level. Like I think, for example, like someone who I think mixed a lot of really cool horror aesthetics into their work is like Arca. I think like Arca, like besides just like they're a musician, but I see them a lot as a performance artist. I feel like on top of their music, they also just like make their music be the background for a performance that a lot of times encapsulates a lot of like horror things, like or just like give it her music lends itself to a lot of just like aesthetics that probably off the bat you'd think, oh my god, this is so like weird and scary. But then as you like kind of immerse yourself more into their world, it's like, oh my god, but it like totally makes sense with the music because it's like you're embracing this chaoticness. And I think that's like really fascinating.
Yeah, especially like kind of how I think with Arca, especially like there's like a kind of layer of kink to it, or like kind of that body horror. And like for me, I'm personally like a huge fan of David Cronenberg, and like I know a ton of trans people that have looked at his films and been like, this is trans, even though there's like no specific like thing we can pinpoint of what makes it trans. It just is trans because it's so much about like body horror as like changing the self. Like his view of body horror isn't like, oh, I want to make gore porn. It's like almost artsy in a way, where he has like a poetic meaning to it. Like he's trying to say something with it, and it's more about like mutability of the self. And like in his newest film, I still haven't seen it yet. I need to see it. It's called Crimes of the Future, and like one of the taglines was like "Surgery is the new sex," and it's like about apparently like a performance artist and a his partner that like do each like publicly do surgery on him as part of their performance act. And it's so very trans. It's like the first time like Cronenberg has like talked about really transness in his movies, because it's becoming more in like the lexicon. But he's been really interesting because like there's so many horror people, like Clive Barker comes to mind, where it's like they're very like kind of transphobic, or they have a trans, like you can tell they may not have the best vibes with trans people that have historically done horror movies that trans people like. But David Cronenberg is like kind of almost self-aware of it, and like the transness imbued in it. And he is like, I don't know, Arca always reminds me, like especially Arca's metal stuff reminds me of like these props that are used in the movie Dead Ringers, because like the props are for like gynecological care, but they look so grotesque. Just look, uh it's like the Dead Ringers like surgery stuff, like the props there, and it looks so like Arca's really metal transfigured like aesthetic. And I love just the how there's like recognition, like both parts recognize the impact of each other. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting because like it's almost like a fuck you to the like trans people wanting to be clean and like be sanitized, like decent, like be sanitized. It's kind of like an ownership of, yeah, I am fucked up, and while still being like accepted, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, like I'm not too familiar with like David Cronenberg's work, but I just like looked up the props and I definitely see like how like a lot of Arca stuff could be very resembling of that. And I also think like, yeah, that's one thing I really noticed about Arca a lot. So like when she does some of these photo shoots or like her face, like the Kick One artwork, or honestly all her artwork, it's like her body, she uses her body is like very much like altered or mutilated to like fit whatever concept she's doing for like that artwork. And I feel like I think that kind of goes, or I feel like that kind of touches into like how like obviously with Arca or like in Arca's photo shoots, it's like very much to the extreme. But like I think I don't know, I feel like it's just like a call to or like a just sort of like nod to like owner like trans people having ownership of their bodies. I feel like societally, a lot of trans folks sometimes don't have ownership of their body with a lot of things, like not to get off political here, but just like with a lot of recent laws or just like legislation and stuff like that happening around the world where like trans folks are limited access to, you know, things that could give them like gender affirmation. And it's like it's really like inspiring or just it's not well, yeah, it's really inspiring and also just like interesting to see like these trans artists take like obviously they're not like actually mutilating but like fictionally mutilate their bodies to kind of make it show that like they have that ownership and they're sort of embracing like they're just embracing the extremeness of like just of that body ownership and that could look in whatever way that they want that they want it to look basically.
Yeah, I think it's really like powerful, kind of like it's also like kind of like there's like the level of legislation, but also how we're perceived. Like sometimes like we don't even want to do anything, but how we're perceived by people like is out of our control. I mean, inherently, but like it's difficult to exist in. I think that's all the time we have for today. We might be back again to talk about more horror things, more trans horror stuff, because we both fucking love this shit. Um, it was great to have you, DJ Hot Chip and Lie. It's
Thank you
always
so
a
much.
pleasure to have you on here.
Thank
And
you.
go listen to Queer Coded, which DJ Hot Chip and Lie hosts. What day, what time?
Yes, it's Thursday at 11. If you're not into horror stuff, I promise over there we're a lot more lighthearted and fun. But yes, thank you so much for having me. This is like a really great privilege, honor, just because it's such I love having conversations like this, and it's just like, yeah, I love it, honestly. So thank you so much for having me. And yeah, check out Queer Coded if you wanna hear me be not so horror like and not talk about scary things.
Yes, I love Queer Coded. It's just so like good for the soul. And DJ Hot Chip and Lie is the bomb. So go check them out. We'll see you again next week post Halloween. Have a good time on Halloween. I'm dressing up. Are you dressing up?
Yes, we'll talk about my costumes later. They're
This
semi.
is this is a tease for future installments. Possibly,
Yes.
possibly, possibly. Alrighty. Goodbye.
All right. Goodbye.
Adios.